Hello, my name is Okechi Emeka Egwen, and for my team, we're going to argue on whether social media has had a net positive impact on human communication among adolescents. For me, I'm going to argue on the con side to say that social media has not had a net positive impact um, on human communication amongst adolescents. And the there are a lot of issues about social media use, amongst young people. And number one fact is the length of time that is spent on social media. People spend upwards of 7 hours a day on social media. This lessens the length of time that they're able to spend on face-to-face communication. The interesting thing about face-to-face communication is that just about 7% is verbal, 93% is non-verbal, all the body languages, all the eye slants, the tone of voice, and all of that. And because, the face-to-face interaction is really reduced, when eventually or at whatever point they have to interact face-to-face, they're not really used to all the cues, and that makes them really awkward in communications. So you can imagine someone who just does all his communication, social media, internet, going on an interview that is face to face, and there's some body language by the interviewer. He's going to completely miss it because he's just not used to communicating like that, and that will make them struggle. Again, the problem about social media is sometimes, and I think it's actually quite often, people put on their best behavior, best parts or whatever, doctored parts on social media, making them look like superstars and what is really very unrealistic. And this makes adolescents compare themselves with these doctored images, and they fall short all the time because these images are not real. I see when people feel that they don't measure up, it could lead to depression, it could lead to negative feelings about themselves, which also then makes it worse, or makes it even harder for them to communicate with other people face to face. And sometimes it actually leads to social isolation. So you find people isolating themselves because they do not feel that they meet up. So it kind of also then worsens the issue about communicating face to face. Again, social media has a way of creating really antisocial tendencies. I think social media is just something that we should all use sparingly and not spend so much time on, because there's a lot of negativity on social media. There's a lot of bullying. People have been bullied to the extent of committing suicide. Some people get so absorbed in this social media that it's almost like an alter life. It's almost like they don't really see the need to communicate face to face because they're so absorbed in it. Some people also get so self-absorbed in social media, they live in that thing, they do all the TikToks or whatever it is on social media, and communicating face to face kind of just flies out of the window. And that itself that's a problem. Now, when people think that they don't meet up, like, I have, my kids have friends who say they have thousands and thousands of followers, and maybe somebody has none, or, has very few, the other person might begin to feel like, there's something wrong with him, and that might lead to depression, lead to anxiety, lead to so many other negative psychological feeling. And whenever there's a lack of confidence, there's then that leads to a lack of proper communication, especially when it is face to face. Like in everything in life, things get things are better with practice. Face to face communication is better when you do it. When you've learned to communicate face to face, when you've learned to speak to people, when you've learned to understand what society expects, when you've learned to understand the cues from people, when it's time to stop, when it's time to stand up and leave. Those are things that you kind of pick up when you're used to communicating. But imagine a situation where somebody is addicted to social media, when you're always checking your social media, where your whole life is surrounded around social media, unless you're a what's it called? You're a game player or something who makes his living by doing that, it's going to be really, really difficult to communicate with people outside of that environment that you're used to. So being so immersed in social media leads to a lot of unhealthy habits and unhealthy patterns, which creates a negative impact on communication. Imagine someone who just jumps when his phone buzzes because there's some social media notification. It leads to unhealthy sleep patterns, and all this results in reduced face-to-face communication, especially because they're now more comfortable with cyber communication, all the texting and whatever, all the other numerous social media, and it really could easily lead to addictions, which are not good. In conclusion, adolescents spend a lot of time on social media. Whatever time is spent on social media removes from what time can be spent face to face. This lack of face to face communication reduces the understanding of non-verbal cues, which makes up a large percentage of face to face communication, upwards of 90% of that. Because of this, they struggle with face to face communication. They struggle even in things like job interviews, romantic relationships, finding friends. Romantic relationships, even if you find your partner on a social network, you still need to communicate face to face with that partner. So how do you do that if you're not used to communicating face to face? So they struggle with things that maybe the older generation would think it's a matter of course, but we find the younger generation struggling with it because of their living in the media world, as it were. And this could lead to an empty selfie life with no substance, just empty, because all you have is a machine in front of you. You really have no real contacts. The best way to use social media, in my opinion, is to combine it with face-to-face contacts. So you kind of have a balance. So you use your social media to get the best of the social media world, and you use your face-to-face world communications to interact with people, understand how these things work, build friendships outside of your computer, build friends, build romantic relationships, and do things together with other people. I think that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, social media in itself has a net negative impact on adolescents in communication. Thank you very much.